Welcome to today into the session Unleashing Potential. And if there's one person in the world, it happens to be in the country of Dubai, is the one and only Andrew Stotter-Brooks. Andrew, welcome. It's great to have you on the show today.
Dr. Ant, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to be here. And yeah, as I said, it's nice to talk to one of my heroes. So it should be a fun conversation.
I must say, if you ever I talk about somebody that really is a mover and a shaker, a person that says never too old to go, never too old to dare, that is Andrew. Starts, I must tell you one thing. I love your sense of humor. I like how you take every situation and you unleash whatever is in front of you. Now, you've just taken on a new challenge at your senior age of a major corporate company in terms of a new job. And what I wanted to just know is, what are the secrets that you have up your sleeve? Because I know you've been highly, highly successful walking into a brand new job and doing so well. What is your secret?
I think it's just I'm just really, really curious. So I'm very curious. I'm not afraid to ask stupid questions. I work at very, very, very senior level. I'm actually in space, and I have been in space for the last kind of year and a half now, where I'm incredibly unfamiliar with how the business operates, and that's really interesting. So I've been on this incredibly steep learning curve. As I said, I suppose the biggest secret is not being afraid to ask the stupid questions. Frequently, I find myself in meetings, to be fair, and someone will use an acronym or a mnemonic or some type of an expression, and I'm not really clear what it means. And I'm really quick to kind of like say, sorry for the stupid question. Would you explain that to me? And I think the important thing about that is when I'm doing that, often people in the meeting are actually quite grateful that I've asked a question. I think sometimes people are too scared to ask those kind of stupid questions. I've never really been scared to ask stupid questions, and I'm also,
Can I just take that point and summarize it? Because you know what, that for me is to unleash the power of clarification. Because that is
yeah.
exactly what you did. That is, you would sit in the meeting, they use an acronym, and you go like, "Hey, hold on, what's it for?" Other people are so scared they don't want to ask the question, but you come up. And that's where leadership comes in, because you've got the boldness to say, "Excuse me, what does that stand for?" And that strategy to clarify actually brings a new understanding into the room. And it takes leadership and it takes courage to do that. Because the thing is, if you're all worried about your little image, there's no ways that you're going to ask that question, because you're going to, what do they think of me? But you're looking at the task at hand, you're looking at something as to the goals have to be achieved, and therefore you go straight into your principle of clarification. So from me, high five. I mean, that's where to do it. Not scared to ask the question. Very proud.
Right. Yeah, right back at you. Yeah, and I don't think I've ever, well, I probably changed I probably started to really get really curious when I was about 28. So that's, more than 30 years ago now. I'm kind of giving my age away. But yeah, I definitely, I'm actually doing a commencement speech for a massive British university on Sunday. And that's quite fascinating. And it's been a period of kind of reflection for me, because I've been thinking, what would I say to 1,000 kind of graduates at a big university, and kind of what advice would I give them on life? So that's been very, very, very interesting. But one of them is obviously getting super curious. Yeah.
Well, interesting. So your first one was clarification. Your second one is curiosity. So as you put curiosity through the blender, speaking to those young people, if they can remain curious, but also staying abreast with developments globally, I mean, because you and I know that the artificial intelligence explosion is literally taking its place. And we do know that work as it is today will not be the same as work will be in the next 10 years, because we see this hybrid of between artificial intelligence and human capital management. We just can't deny it. So remaining curious, those young people, but only some of them will be successful and others will be not. What will make the difference?
I think it's there's probably two answers to that question. I think the first one is, don't be stupider than you need to be. That's an interesting statement. I don't think you need to be particularly smart. I repeatedly get told off by Marshall Goldsmith about what I'm about to say, but because he always says that I kind of like tend to think of myself as not necessarily the smartest person in the room, but I've made a business. I've made my life really by surrounding myself by people who are smarter than me. So I think sometimes leaders get scared of having people who are perhaps cleverer than them in the room. And for me, that's always been a major asset. So it's there because everyone brings they bring different perspectives. So trying to learn, I think that's really, really important as well. And so just, not staying stupid and just trying to continue to learn. I was on stage actually in your neck of the woods in Johannesburg last year, and I was with the head of learning for AWS in Amazon in the US, and he kind of came up with some really interesting statistics around what people did in the sort of like late 1980s and what they do in the 2020s, and that for me was quite fascinating, because he was suggesting that 80% of what people did in around 1984, 1985 no longer exists in 2020.
True.
So that means there's a huge shift in kind of what people are doing. And I think so you've got to stay curious. My organization is really at the forefront of things like AI and technology like that. And I think that's amazing. So you don't want to get left behind. So I think that's my first point. The second point is just really around making sure that you don't have to be the most, maybe I've made the points already, but you don't have to be the most brilliant person in the room.
Yeah.
So I'm keen to be brilliant. You just need to be slightly more brilliant than the other people when you're working. And it's just about, for me, it's about branding, it's about consistency, and it's about how you make people feel. So, if you create a safe space where people can kind of challenge you and they don't feel threatened to challenge you, particularly as a very senior leader, it makes a big difference, because they tend to be more open to kind of feedback themselves. So it's just trying to create a learning culture, I think, is important.
Well, we can stay into the C's, because you've just now touched on something beautiful. One is, you spoke about correction. You spoke about there's never a stupid question to ask, which means you're not scared of correction, because even if it was, people will correct you and say, Andrew, but that is not the case, and this is the case. So we've had clarification is important, curiosity plays a role, but correction is okay, because as you correct it, you stand to be lifted into the next actual level. And then what I fascinating is that the word consistency came out of your mouth, and that is that if you are doing what you're doing, if you're consistent at doing it well, you will be noticed. There is just no ways that consistency cannot be applauded, which I find is absolutely fascinating.
I think do you know what? One of the biggest learnings I've had as well, I've made a real career out of asking questions, and particularly trying to get other people's perspectives. I think I was, again, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, I've really, I would say probably 80% of the time I was asking questions, and I was still, so I was saying, what would you do, Anthony? What would, in this situation, what would you do? What would you do, Mohammed, in this particular situation? And what I've really learned over the last 4 or 5 years is that often, Mohammed will give me a view on what he thinks he should be doing. And what I used to do up until about 4 or 5 years ago, I would then say, oh, that's great, Mohammed, perhaps you could do this as well. Yeah. And that, I think, is, on reflection now, I kind of, I don't do that any longer. So even if I perhaps got something to add to what Mohammed is saying, or maybe give him a little kind of stops nuggets, if those things exist, I tend to refrain from doing that, because I think as soon as I offer any tiny bit of advice in a conversation, it tends to just massively change the dynamic. And I think one of the things that when you're quite a senior leader, you miss out on you can't fully understand the power of status in relationships. So I think some people defer to that. So yeah, sorry, that makes sense. Yeah,
it does, because what you have said there is that be open to conversation. Because as you referred to, Mohammed, if you're open to conversation, you actually are able to unleash to actually go to the next level, because that conversation just opens it up. But earlier on, you spoke about the word culture. Now let's link the two. You're in conversation, but culture plays a role, because Mohammed and you are not from the same space and not from the same background. However, that company culture puts you both in the same company, and surely culture comes into play. So how would you actually deal with that?
I think, well, for me, it's really simple. It comes again. I frequently get asked this question, I tend to use the same response, which is there's kind of, for me, there's four tricks really, and I suppose they're not necessarily tricks, but they're definitely they're useful. I think the first one is just leading with respect. So simply just seeking to understand before we seek to be understood. That's really important, and I would definitely say that from a respect point of view, no one has to earn my respect. So Anthony doesn't have to earn my respect. Mohammed doesn't have to earn my respect. What is incredibly possible in my life is that people can lose my respect. So, I get quite disappointed with people when they say, Anthony's got to earn my respect. That concept just frustrates me. I give my respect freely to anyone who's asking for it. Of course, people can lose my respect. That's relatively simple. But it's leading with respect is number one. I think number two, we've kind of touched on it already a little bit, but it's just what I would call hearing people. Okay. So again, it's the more that you can listen and actually understand perspectives. The reality is, if I take if I take a drop of blood from anyone on the planet, I mean, I've been privileged. I work with Fijian police officers. I've worked with Muscovites in Russia. I've worked with the UK. I've worked with South Africans. I've worked with hundreds of different nationalities: Chinese people, Italian people, French people. It's fascinating. If I took a drop of blood and we kind of put my blood and their blood onto a slide, and we looked under the microscope, we'd see that we're 99.99999% the same, right? Okay. So I think, unfortunately, human beings tend to look for differences, and I would say it's probably easier to look for similarities, because we all have very similar similar aspirations. So, leading with respect, listening to understand, so hearing people, I think, is really important. Number three for me, everyone gets acknowledged. So that's actually quite exhausting, but nobody gets past me without some type of acknowledgement. So I think that's really important. And then I think just the final one for me is just trying to remember people and trying to remember something about people, because when you can use remembering something is very, very, very powerful. So because you can bring that into the conversation, it's like that continuation. I get really frustrated. I mentioned this. I was with it was just the Saudi what's the I'm trying to think of the name of the Saudi sovereign fund. But anyway, I was with them literally a couple of weeks ago in Riyadh, and what was fascinating for me was that I shared this story, and I'm not sure it completely landed with them, but there's a supermarket I go to. It's quite a nice supermarket, to be fair. But they ask me the same question every single time I go in there. Mm-hmm. And it really actually gets to the point where it really annoys me, because I'm a regular customer. I'm probably in there 5 or 6 times a week. Sometimes I'm in there 2 or 3 times a day. Because I'm buying used stuff. But they can't seem to, and it's the same person asking the same question, and it's really annoying. So rather than trying to, they just almost go through this kind of like process with me, and I find that very frustrating. So if she could just remember that the answer to the question, she wouldn't have to ask me that, and she could even say, she could talk about how was yesterday for you, what are you doing today? True. Trying to make it a bit more personal. So remembering. Sorry, that's a long way of telling you that, but remembering. So
okay, but let's take that point. Let's just recap there. 1, you said lead with respect. 2, listen to understand through hearing people. 3, acknowledgement is key. And 4, remembrance. Now, if you are in that shop 4, 5, or 6 times a week, surely by now there should be some resemblance in terms of recognizing you, so they don't have to ask the question again. Because if they remember this is a regular client, you would go and shop there with an open heart and say, hey, these guys know me. I mean, one thing, if you look at the staff member, she's got the name badge, and you say, thank you, Alison, I highly appreciate you serving me today. She goes, wow. She forgets she's got her name tag on, but you, as one of those people I know that love to connect with people, and to remember that next time when you walk in, even if you don't see a name tag, say, hey, Alison, how are you doing today? And that just changes that situation a bit around. And I think that is a great strategy.
So you can yeah.
Say again.
Yeah. It's really good. And I said I spent let's I always say never hurts to smile. It never hurts to make really good eye contact. It never hurts to give a warm greeting. It never hurts to say, you know, how can I help you? And it never hurts to say, have a great day. You know, it sounds really sad, but it sounds really simple. But so few people can actually master it. And if you do it regularly, it becomes second nature. It is quite exhausting. Like most things, it looks easy to do, but it's just doing that. And with every single team member you come into contact with, every human being that you see, just trying to running through that kind of sequence over time, it makes a massive difference. And I tell you, the biggest benefactor is me from doing that, because people just obviously then whenever I move around anywhere, they're high-fiving me, shaking my hand, saying good morning. They know my name, which I find incredibly energizing. Is probably the word.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Stott, let me ask you this much. If there's one thing I admire about you, that's where you are one of my heroes, is the art of connection. You know how to connect with people. It doesn't matter who you speak to, but they just lighten up because you make them feel comfortable. So, what is sort of your approach? Maybe it's even subliminal that you don't even know how good you are at this, but I've noticed your ability to connect with anyone. Just talk on that so that people listening in can say, maybe I can take a line from Stott on how to do it. Talk to me about that.
I have I'm a big believer in following recipes. So
Okay.
in 99% of my conversations, I'm following a very well-tested recipe. I've been perfecting that recipe since I was sort of like maybe 15 or 16.
Yeah.
So when I always feel slightly like a fraud when I kind of share the recipe with people, but I think the recipe it's so powerful, and you can pretty much get whatever you want from people. So I'll share the recipe with you. I'm very
Okay.
happy to do that. It's really simple. So my 4 recipes, you'll like this one, because it's basically there's four E's.
Okay.
Okay. So the first E, usually the first E is preceded by what I would call a sincere compliment. So usually I would say, I would probably soften my compliment as well. So I wanted to talk to a stranger in a supermarket or on a train or on a plane. I would probably, my first strategy would be to pay them a sincere compliment, and I would soften the compliment. So I would say, well, I hope you don't mind. I just saw your bag or your watch I just love your glasses. Yeah, I love your bag. I really, it's amazing. And then I would basically say, hi, my name's Andrew. What are you up to today? Where are you going today? What are you up to today? And so my entry question is typically is open, very, very open, broad question. And then, of course, that's followed by what I would call, obviously we talk about active listening, but I would say it's actually aggressive listening. So I'm really leaning into the conversation. So 99.9% of the time, people will obviously engage with me.
Okay.
So they've got the compliment. It's simply, I've got my entry question, my first E, and then I'm following it up with what I would call my experience. So the second E is experience. So I'm then listening. I'm literally taking what I'm hearing, and I'm almost repeating it back to them. So I'm probing the question. So, tell me more about that. Sounds fascinating. Explain to me how you got to that point. So I'm then probing the conversation, which is my second E. My third E, which is I think the one of the hardest E's, is basically what I call my enhancement E.
Okay.
Yeah. So enhancement is really, I share a little bit about myself, something that's similar. So I always say people like them. So I don't want to take over the conversation, but I would then just make them, give the impression I'm similar to them. And then effectively my fourth E is what I call my engagement E. So it's engagement. Then I'm actually asking for what I want typically. So there's those 4 E's. It's entry question, yep. Basically. Well, it's normally a softened, sincere question, compliment, then followed by an entry question, followed by listening for experience, then looping it around a few times, building the conversation. Then it goes into enhancement. I share a tiny bit about who I am or what I'm doing, and then basically, which is similar to what I've just been hearing. And then I basically move into my engagement phase, which is kind of asking for what I want. If you imagine that, if I go and that conversation plays out, a dozen, 20, 30 times a day with different people. If I walk into a senior leader's office and I go straight, from kind of, straight into, entry engagement.
Yeah.
Actually, what happens is I get nowhere at all. Yeah. If you go straight into I need this bit of information, there's nothing. You can't do it. Most people get very, very suspicious. But if you do an entry question, you basically listen to what they're saying, and it can happen in like 30 or 40 seconds, or it can happen over 20 minutes. But it's really nice, simple process. Yeah.
But I must say one thing, Starts. What I admire is you call it your own personal recipe. But I can tell you one thing: it's a recipe for success. It doesn't make you the master baker; it makes you the master communicator. Of course, that's the end result, whether you want to do it or not. Uh, but what I like is that you immediately have this four E's. It's the entry, it's the experience, it's the enhancement, it's the engagement. But you see, because you live it, you walk the talk, you do it every single day, it becomes second nature. And as you say, sometimes this entire process can be 40 seconds and you've just taken it through so that you have the right to engage. Because here's the truth. Many people think they can speak into your life, but they do not ask for permission first. They just start talking into your life, and it's like, hey, dude, I did not give you permission. So I think that's sort of for me, that clarification is the question in terms of, may I add value to your life or may I comment? It's very important to get permission from the person to actually speak into their life. Can you underline that?
Yeah, it's as I said, it's that that point around softening. So you can, I've got some very funny stories I can't really share probably in this forum, but I could definitely take those stories offline with you, which are hilarious. But it really is, if you are, I always say trying to soften a compliment. I would say, hundreds of millions of people go to bed every night dying for a compliment, and I pay people. It has to be sincere, and it has to be sincere.
True.
But if you ask permission to pay the compliment, so by asking permission, I'm saying, I hope you don't mind, but I absolutely love your bag. Correct. I absolutely love your smile. I love that look. True. Yeah. People they just melt, they really do. And so the softening is, I hope you don't mind, Correct. Or would you mind sharing where you got that bag from? People are delighted, because we're making lots of decisions around the bag we're buying, or the scent we're wearing, or the glasses, or how we have our hair, or the shirt we're wearing, or the blouse, or the pants, whatever it is. So just trying to be, I suppose that comes down to being super present. Okay. So really paying attention to, I think being present is probably one of the most exhausting things that I am, and that's just, I'm constantly in the moment. Okay. So I'm there. I don't really. I think a lot of people sort of walk through life in a kind of like trance-like. They don't notice the detail. Mm-hmm. So then what I do is I'm really tuning into the fine detail of stuff around me, the environment I'm in. When I go into a situation, I'm kind of like really. I have a kind of a heightened sense of awareness when I'm engaging. So I notice things, and perhaps I notice things more than some people, because I'm just massively present. I'm in the moment.
That statement, people don't know how much you care until they know how much you.
Yeah, it's so true. Until that's, and people don't know how they don't know how much you care until they know how much you how much you care. Well, they don't know how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah, but it's also, people will only people will never ever forget how you make them feel. That's it. So if you make them feel like dirt, or you make them feel disrespected, or you make them feel anxious, or they feel, if you make them feel in a way bad, or you make them feel like heard and acknowledged and respected and remembered, of course they're just, of course they will remember you. I was sharing that story, a couple of hours ago, because I was trying to make the point, and I was. When I was a long time ago, I was when I first started work. So this is 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was a very young, assistant manager, and I was about 18. And my managers felt there was a challenge. So they wanted to try to force some respect into me, as well, respect for team members. They used to call me Mr. S. That's the important part of the story, because they used to call me Mr. S. Which is fine. I was only literally a small child, but they called me Mr. S. So I had the keys and I could use the photocopier, that kind of stuff. But when a couple of years ago, there was this kind of, I picked up some type of an award, which was lovely. But what was interesting, I had this individual reached out to me, and they actually said, "Hi, Mr. S, how are you?" And I was like, That was really confusing, right? Because I
Okay.
was thinking, I haven't been called Mr. S for 40 years.
40
So
years.
that's very strange. Somebody called me Mr. S. So anyway, so I was obviously, that kind of piqued my curiosity, and I said, "Oh, wow, it's great to hear from you. Where did our kind of paths cross?" And it wasn't until that point where I kind of suddenly, this woman says, "I was Pauline," and she said, "Oh, Stotts, we used to work together in like the place called Bernie Inns, which no one would be familiar with. But it was like a restaurant chain." So she said to me, we met in Bernie Inn, and you were my manager. And she was probably about 10, 15 years older than me. She's now long retired. We had this conversation, but she said, "You know what? You have all the." It's a huge compliment, and I'm not quite sure if I deserve it. But she said, "All the managers I've ever worked with, Mr. S, you were always the most, genuine, caring, sincere kind of guy." Right.
Yeah.
So I've never worked with a manager who was, as sincere and genuine and really cared about people like you do. So that's when. So back to that stupid point, people never forget how you make them feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what has really distilled out of this is that the art of complimenting somebody with sincerity is truly just saying the other see caring.
Yeah.
If you just show and indulge in the fact that you care for them, it just sort of unlocks the next level. You know what I call that? I call that chemistry, because not everybody has got the ability to connect and engage in such a way with that compliment that is so sincere that they feel there's chemistry between the two of you. Because when there is, people will go to the nth degree to actually please you, work alongside with you, and literally bring their side. And that is what you've done with that. Well, I want to lead you and start landing this plane with the last one, because now from that chemistry, I've got one last C that just came into the play for me today. It's the word character. Andrew Stotts has got character in terms of who he is, because he's always the same. He's got his what he calls a recipe, and he said you sometimes feel guilty. No, don't, because that recipe is what has worked through your walk of engaging with people successfully. And that to me is just outlines, lastly, your character. You are who you are, and that is what makes you Stotts. There's the only one superhuman that is like that, and that is you. And I want to just compliment you and say, I really appreciate that side of you.
Very flattered. Yeah, genuinely very flattered. Coming from you, Anthony, means a lot. Yeah, it's just, as I said, I find it very. It's just something that you just. And I think one other thing I would say is, if you can see another human being doing, you can do it. That was another conversation today. So if you can see someone else doing something, it's within your power. I think we tend to make excuses for ourselves. We tend to say, well, we're not clever enough, or we're not good looking enough, or we're not the right nationality, or the wrong sex, whatever it might be. But in reality, you can do it. If you can see Anthony doing, or you can see me doing it, you can do it. But it's not easy. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of development. Yeah.
But you see, what's nice about the fact that I could actually land this plane with the last point on character was because I know you. If I did not know you, that would have been an empty compliment, Stotts. But it's not. You and I have walked a journey of more than a year and a half, and I know.
Oh, we have indeed.
Yeah, we have indeed. We have a relationship, and that's what I'm able to say to you. So I wanted to say it and compliment you on that, some clarification. So in taking this from your side today, before I just have my last little word, what is your last unleashing potential words to those people that are listening today that are inspired by the great Stotts?
I think just believe in yourself. I think believe in yourself, and also it's something that I struggle with almost every day, which is just that what I call my worry is a nightmare for me. And I think there's a fantastic song called the Sunscreen Song by a man called Baz Luhrmann, and I think he's a brilliant line. He's what nationality is, I think it's Australian, but brilliant chap. And there's a line in the song where he says, "Worry, but know that worrying is about as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubblegum." Yeah. And sometimes I kind of I'm a person, people worry, but we kind of overthink things. So try to get a lid on. We only have control over one thing, Anthony, which is how we think. Right? We only have that. We can't control anything else in our environment, just what we think. So trying to get a grip on what you're thinking, makes a massive difference. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you. It's like, we were together last week having a pint together. That's what it feels like. It's fantastic. So I'm just going to, from my time, summarize and say, between this great friendship that you and I have, your point today is, number one, don't be scared to clarify. Be curious enough to go to the next level, because correction is okay, because consistency plays a vital role as you dig into the culture of understanding that by having that conversation, you actually care enough to pay a compliment that forms that chemistry between the two of you. Because why? Your character is in place. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Andrew Stotts, the one and only.
Look. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you, my man.
Shukran, baby.
Bless you.
Speak to you soon, yeah? Love you, my friend.
Yes.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.